Good evening. Tonight on Sports 225, I'll tell you that later, WAFB sportscaster Jacques Doucet will join me, and it might be the first time he's on Sports 225. He was a Sports Monday guy at times, and we got a lot of things to talk about with Jacques. But first off, RayCastle. Now, you're probably saying at first, they're saying, who's RayCastle?
That's not uncommon.
And that's all right.
Not uncommon they do that. So.
That's okay. RayCastle is an associate professor of kinesiology at LSU who, in a Reader's Digest version, would be to say that he trains trainers and athletic trainers who work athletic events, LSU events, and other things. But Ray and a lot of his people were working the Boston Marathon.
Yep.
And there you go. So that's the hook.
Yep.
So here's the other part before I let Ray jump in. So Ray and I have known each other, and I said, Ray, I got to catch up on you a little bit. I said, can you send me a resume? So he sends me an email with an attachment, and I opened it up, and I looked at it, and I said, oh, there's what I need to know, and I hit print. Ray, 23 pages.
Killing trees.
23 pages. I thought it was going to be one page. It was 23 pages, but I want you to know I read all 23 of them. You've been some places.
You read more than I have on that, so like that. So.
You've been some places.
Yeah, a couple of places.
But specifically, as far as it goes, Southern Miss.
Yes.
Louisiana Lafayette, back when it was the Artist formerly known as USL.
Yep. Red Dot basketball, and
that's it.
I know I first met you there.
Yeah.
You were doing coverage there for men's basketball and I think other sports as well.
I was real good friends with the old staff there, with Marty Fletcher and a guy named Todd Reinhardt, who was an assistant coach, and then Ray worked with them, and we knew each other from there. And boy, I had no idea that however many years later, which I think Marty's been gone probably about 17 years, 16 years.
Yeah, this 97, 98, I'm sorry, 96, 97 was his last season there.
Yeah.
So.
By the way, the last that I heard about Marty was that he was the director of women's officials for the Mountain West Conference.
I think so. I know I got a message from his wife, Cynthia, not long after we'd gotten back from Boston, and that they were sending through Facebook and sent a message.
There you go.
Doing well. So I keep in touch with them fairly often, every once in a while, and Todd and Eric and the rest of them over there.
There you go. So, of course, when everything happened in Boston, Ray and I kept up a little bit, as did everyone from here who had some connection or friends or associates who had either gone to run the race or be a part of it. And your situation was really unique because you guys didn't go to run.
No,
so
we did
tell
not.
me how that came about.
Well, I ran, but not because I wanted to.
Yeah, right, exactly.
We had actually, I'm going to backtrack for a second. How I got kind of somewhat hooked on the marathon, this was my first year providing medical coverage. The medical coordinator, Chris Trianos, who is also an athletic trainer, I met him in '99, I think. We were roommates at the Olympic Training Center up in Lake Placid. So he's from Boston. You
worked with bobsled, if I'm right?
Yes, a couple of years after that. Went on the World Cup tour with him in Europe for a little bit. So after that, he kept asking me, you ought to come up for the marathon. It's a great event. And I had some other friends who had mentioned something about it, and finally just decided, okay, I'm going to do it this year, and found out they also have athletic training students from other universities come in. So I put an email and also spoke with our students in our program, and they have a limited number per program that can go up. Most of they have is 5. And so I sent it out, and 3 were able to go, and they paid their own way up to the Boston and Boston University athletic training students. They house them there. And my wife came up with me, and we stayed with a friend of hers who went to first grade up to high school at U-High. Alice Stuckey Michelle, and her husband Mark, and their kids. They stayed north of the city. They live north of the city, so about 30 miles. So that's where we stayed with them, and so we were up doing the medical coverage for the event. And
now, what was your job like that day?
Well, being an athletic trainer, we're forward front already. We're doing they have if you look at where the finish line is, so everything back we had about 130 athletic trainers. So it was really a big a forward front of what we do for medical coverage. So I was there from our main area was from the finish line. There's a media bridge on back to the next to the block, and that's where the main medical tent was. So in that area, we had about 3 or 4 physicians, and then we had about 15 or so certified athletic trainers and 30 athletic training students. And these were first year, second year, third year clinical students.
And 3 of those, of course, were yours.
Yes, one was actually running. We had 20 there doing wheelchair duty, another 10 that were floaters. So we had by chance had one of our athletic training students was there, happened to be a first-year athletic training student, and then the other two were on the next block doing, they call it sweep duty, or next couple of blocks past the water and the metals, and you go back about 2 blocks down, then you turn, and there's another medical tent. Has about 80 or 90 beds, I think. The main medical tent had about 240 beds.
Because they expected that many people to need medical attention after a race of that magnitude.
Yes, the year before, in the last year, they had serious heat issues. They had multiple hypothermia cases, 108, 109 temperatures. Nobody, was fortunate was that the steps they put in place, I think they've had that, but it was really, you think if you plan for that, that's really the worst they had ever. And so you're having that many cases and serious, no renal failure, no nothing out of that. So so that's where I was initially signed. I was initially signed to the heat and hypothermia.
But this particular year it was real cool. The weather was ideal for running.
I'm wearing thermals, in the 50s and beautiful weather. So for that day. So that morning they moved me to the finish line area.
So that's where you were.
Yes.
Well, that is a perfect place for us to hold everyone's interest, including my own, and take a break because the finish line was where it was at.
Yes, it was.
Wow. Ray Castle, he's an associate professor of kinesiology at LSU, and as you just gathered, he was at the Boston Marathon and at the finish line, and what comes next I'm sure will be most interesting. I'm Lee Feinswag, you're watching Sports 225. Some strange noises and who knows what. Back on Sports 225, and where we last left you was at the Boston Marathon, and Ray Castle was at the finish line, which, wow. Okay, so now, I mean, I just got to throw it off to you and tell me what happened at that point.
Well, it was about, you said earlier, it was a beautiful day, in the 50s.
And that's a fantastic area there on Boylston Street.
I had never been to Boston. It was, I mean, if you've never been to Boston, you've got to go. I mean, it was a.
Well, I can tell you, I've stumbled home from that area a couple of times when I've stayed in that part of town.
So beautiful area. It was just a fantastic experience just to be, to see the city, and it doesn't, you see pictures and TV, but it doesn't do it justice. But we were there. We'd had, I think, about the 4 hours into it. And they had staggering. So I'd never worked a marathon or a racing event that large. So, when they make the turn onto Copley, you're seeing this near Copley Square. You see this wave of head just continuous. And it's like, they're flooding in and
so let me just, for scene setting's sake, because the leaders come in just over 2 hours.
Yes, and the wheelchair racers as well.
And then over the course of the next couple hours, which is kind of like, everything was going smoothly, people were coming in, and then you start getting to the much more average runners and people who might be in more need of medical attention in theory, right?
I mean, they're coming across, and they're, obviously, we have in that whole area of everyone, our instructions were, okay, this is your area. You don't move past the finish line. I mean, if we're even our area where we were, we have this is where we move back and forth. So if someone comes across the finish line, we make sure they don't fall. They don't hit the ground. So we are, obviously we're seeing them come across. You're looking at multiple, every couple of seconds. You may have 2 or 3.
So somebody looks okay, you leave them be, and then you keep focusing.
And we still walk with them. They're wobbly, and we still walk with them, or they may see signs of neurological dysfunction that is common for endurance athletes or doing endurance. So they may have their cognitive function. They may not appear. Their consciousness may not be intact, or other signs. So, we had 1 or 2 that we walked with. More so, I'm walking back. I said, "Let's go and walk with you." So I would hand them off to another person down the line, and I'd go right back up to the front or near the finish line. So about an 8 to 10 meter area we would work. So if they fell, we had wheelchairs. We'd get them right off the area and keep moving. So actually, it was a lull. They had time starts. They had the stagger start. So if you look on the video, it was about a minute or 2 where it was just really low all of a sudden.
When the bombs went off.
Yes.
And where were you at that time?
If you look at the media bridge, there's a wedge underneath, and we have water bottles, other things there. And I was probably somewhere around that media bridge. And for the day, I was on the opposite side of the street, covering that half of the street where the wedge is. So around the front of that wedge. So it ends up being, I guess, about maybe 10 meters or so from the start, where the finish line. You see the big finish, and there's in that area. So
when the bomb, the first one went off, then how close were you?
about the same area. So
30 feet.
well, I
35
mean,
feet.
from there, but I mean, it went.
Yeah.
I guess the explosion was, I guess, maybe been about 30 meters or so. I guess hard to tell from the video, but I guess in pictures about 30 meters, I guess, or 40, or maybe 30 to 50 meters. I don't know from or where it was from the finish line itself. So give or take 50, too darn close. So for comfort. So
what goes through your mind at first, and did you realize?
It goes on. The sound. It sounded like the ROTC. You go to football games. ROTC. It's a really
When they shoot that cannon off
yes,
in the end zone.
It is just like it was just really loud. And first initial was that you don't think it's. They didn't tell us about this, and so you see I look and see the plume of smoke up. And keep in mind athletes are still coming in, so we're trying to. You see this, but you see what's over there. Trying to stay on target with what's happening. So see the plume of smoke, and all of a sudden I look down, and there are folks on the ground.
Wow.
So we see one or two runners, and it's just like, okay, this is really what's you don't want to think it's that. And then a couple of seconds, the next one went off, and at that one it was we're taught from a medical and emergency personnel, we're taught you do not go in, you don't want to risk your own danger in going into an area. So most part probably just still. I'm looked to the left. I'm thinking, okay, it's over here. It's going to happen over in the grandstand area. That's my initial reaction. And I remember looking back at one of the co-captains of the area, Larry Venus, who's a head athletic trainer at Boston University. He was close to me, and we don't even call what we exchange words. I mean, we looked, and it's like, okay, did we just a sense of calm for a second, like we got to go, and we ran forward. So it's about a minute or so, I guess. That occurred. So it was a lot to process. Yeah. One, my wife Catherine, I had seen her a couple hours beforehand, and they had come into the city, and I had actually told her, why don't you go around south past the other medical tents, come up near on Boyston, where and I told her you can walk up and down, and actually where the bomb explosions had been.
Right, because I would imagine at that point, number one, the medical part of you is, okay, they're injured people, something bad has happened, I've got to help them. But you're worried about your wife, where is she? And then you've got those 3 student trainers who are your responsibility as well. I imagine your head was like going crazy.
They were behind me, so it's just if it's forward, what's happening? I mean, they're in an area. I knew they for a couple seconds they're safe, but or didn't really. I saw one of our students. I saw him. I recall seeing him briefly. Once we're in the middle of everything. So I ran up about. I guess it was where the main area was, and trying to get to the scaffolding, and so everybody's on it. So the main personnel there you have 4 physicians, and you have about 50 or so athletic trainers and athletic training students. That's the crux of the medical personnel at that area. So if you see a red hat or a white jacket, those were athletic trainers. So if you look at in the video or still images, I went in and I have a little small medical pack I always carry any event. So I had the medical EMS, medical shears, and got up to the fence. There's a wood fence, and it's like we just couldn't get through it. You're trying to get through it's a wood picket fence behind the scaffolding. So we got through the part of the scaffolding. Someone else was in front of me, so got there, and I got my shears, cut the shears down, and I see it just kind of flow away, and then walk right up, and you walk into another world. It's just something that's hard to, then it's really when everything went into really hyperdrive. I mean, part of that is really, I feel everything was in hyperdrive. So
in your brain.
I think we're trying to recall everything. It's it goes so fast.
And let me, for a reset, because if you just happen to be tuning in and you're hearing this whole story, this is RayCastle, and he's a professor of kinesiology who was at LSU, who was at the Boston Marathon with 3 student trainers, and we're talking about what happened after the bombs went off. You're prepared for almost everything, but usually it's a blown knee. Somebody has a heart attack, you're the guy you want to have around, that kind of thing. But something like this, you just can't prepare for even in your mind.
Right. I mean, we're taught to handle, it could be anything from an amputation, and we're taught to handle any types of trauma there are. And when you walk in, you see, I don't have to go into details with every, you can see, I walk in, and the first thing I just realized, and looking back at the images and some of the video, I recall what I see is I'm used to being around I have everybody, a big medical group around us for that time, and all of a sudden, we have physicians that have a special bib on. Athletic trainers, we have a red hat and white jacket. So you walk in here and there's nobody there. I mean, it's just. I know people are behind and coming in, but before that was.
So you're one of the very few first medical responders.
Yeah,
into
and looking at the pictures, I mean, image I saw probably the first 3 or 4 medical personnel to any of the victims at bomb site 1. So the hard part is what we're taught to triage, and that became instinctive. But the lay people, husbands, girlfriends, boyfriends, they were there doing some initial things already. The first victim I walked in up to, or didn't walk, but I moved into, was a lady who had, the husband already had a belt tourniquet and was putting a second one on. And at that point, my triage mode is I need to do a quick body assessment. She had extensive lower leg trauma, and I'm showing him how to do femoral artery pressure on both legs. Wow. And just try to maintain calm. We're coming. I knew we had tons of medical support coming, and I had to move to the next person and trying to see who we can get out of that area, because after the one area, there's just a pile of people that are there, and they're still they're still conscious, they're moving, but we're trying to get into them. And by the time I got 2 or 3, the fire and police and general population had pulled the scaffolding back so they could get out to the street, and then everybody comes in. Then provided care for 3 or 4, getting them into wheelchairs and whatnot, and then I became an assistive role. So we had enough people there, and what do you need? Equipment, supplies, help in splinting, et cetera.
Wow, I mean, it's got me gripping just sitting here talking to you. So hold that thought. We got to take a break. Ray Castle is with me. He's an associate professor of kinesiology at LSU, telling us about his experience at the Boston Marathon. Later on in the show, Jacques Doucet from WAFB will join me, but we'll be back for another segment with Ray. I'm Lee Feinswag. You're watching Sports 225. All right, last segment. Back on Sports 225, visiting with Ray Castle from LSU, who was at the Boston Marathon with 3 of his student athletic trainers. When we went to break, we were talking about your immediate reaction and everything. I would imagine there are a couple things. Number one is anybody who's already, at that point, run 26 miles. They haven't necessarily run 26.2. The idea of being blown off their feet, even if they weren't hurt by elements from the bomb, would leave them, jelly-legged and disoriented. You were just talking about people who weren't affected by the bomb, how bad off they can be. So you have this whole bunch of runners who are all messed up, not even from the bomb. And then you've got spectators, and then the runners. It's just, oof.
Well, it was primarily there were spectators that were injured there on the sidewalk. I think there were several during the race. I'm not sure about what happened at bomb site 2, but it goes back to the emergency action plan, the response plan. Everything was in place. Everybody had a zone of responsibility, and I've looked at some of the articles that came out. I know the New York Times came out with one. There was a snapshot of an audio recordings, and even there was a nurse who I saw in the article. They did an audio segment with her, and she said, she's passed the medals and the medical, and they're still providing care for her. So we knew what the mission was. Everybody is to take, stay in your job. We just happen to be the first ones and move forward for that. So I think that's one thing I'm really proud of, not just for our 3 athletic training students at LSU, but all the athletic training students that were there, and other personnel as well. I mean, they have a job. They stuck to it, even in I think if you asked any of them, they were, everybody was. You have a sense of helplessness. You're scared, obviously, but they stayed and did what they were trained to do.
Well, you had to be proud of your kids too, to know.
Oh, I'm uber proud. I mean, how they conducted themselves. They did not run. They have a job to do. They stuck to it, and I think for those schools,
we want to throw out their names.
Caitlin McKinley, who is a 3rd-year clinical. She just passed her board exam a couple weeks ago.
Good.
So she's graduating this Thursday. Super excited for her. Brendan Jacob, who is a 2nd-year athletic training student, and Derek Carter, who's a 1st-year athletic training students.
Boy, talk about on the job training. Geez. So how long did your day last? At what point that day of the marathon did you finally say, okay, I'm going back to my hotel now. I got to get off my feet.
Well,
I know,
it's not a question. I guess the day before I had assisted with a smaller group covering the 5K, which had about 6,000 runners, and the invitational 1 mile. So I had came into the city and stayed with a colleague of mine that day and that night. So we had to be at the main medical tent for 7 a.m. that morning.
Right.
So we had to do check-in, credentialing. We had a group medical meeting with all the medical personnel, several, 600, 700, 800 medical from all the tents. We were moving into one auditorium. So they gave a full overview again, and then that day. So once we were out, that 30 or 40 minutes, I guess, lapsed. The 30 minutes, then we moved us in the medical tent. But now we are in the way, so to speak. So we regressed us back when that was after the second bomb. There was a bomb threat on the grandstands, and they regressed us back, and they had the last last medical personnel treating victims out there, and they regressed, got those off. And I think that's probably one of the bigger things is the fact that overall there were 97 victims that were moved off those 2 bomb sites into the primary medical tent in probably less than 22 minutes.
Wow.
And
Now,
it was just, we were rolling.
At what point did you and your 3 trainers finally get all back together again?
I saw Derek in the main medical tent. I saw it, we had a chance to, and he had already communicated he was already back in the main medical tent, and he'd been doing wheelchair duty, and you probably saw his picture on some of the initial pictures that came out, and doing wheelchair duty. And I saw him, and I'm like, "You're okay? I'm okay." They're okay. Are they okay? Good. Stay where they are. They'll give them instructions on what they need to do in terms of meeting back up, and how to proceed. But stick to they're going to stay with their duties. And then I told him, I said, "I don't care what I do. You're in my right hip pocket. Do not leave me. You're here. So I know you're in here, but in case I have to get, unless I tell you otherwise." So that was making sure them. And then we regrouped as a group, a large group, about 2 or 3 blocks down at the other medical tent. And then from there we walked out to Boston University, about 2.5, 3 miles.
Yeah, that's a good walk. Now, when was the next time you saw your wife?
I saw her that night.
Okay.
About I guess about 7:30, 8 o'clock. So we got back, and they were staying with students, so I picked up the
So you went back out to your friend's house
and drove out there at 7:30, 8 o'clock. So
what did you think when you finally got to that house and you sat down and I hope had your first cocktail and just had to think about what had to happen that day?
It was interesting because a lot of the things you think of as a healthcare provider, I still had my clothes on. I could have changed, and I did not change. And these are things that are I've become a practitioner and a student and a patient all at one time, from a mental health standpoint, that I still had blood on my, I'd hurt my knee pretty bad at the bomb site somehow. I don't know how I did it, banged it up pretty good. And so I didn't realize it's about 20, 30 minutes later when I'm in the medical tent, somebody comes up, "You're bleeding, are you okay?" I'm limping. I'm like, I look at them like they're crazy. I'm fine. And then I realize.
You don't know how it happened.
Yeah, I don't know where it happened. I pull my pants up in the tights and nothing's cut or anything in my pants. And all of a sudden I feel like somebody hit me with a hammer. So, instantaneously, like we're talking now, it's like, "Oh, hit you with a hammer." So,
yeah.
But we got back, and my main goal was trying to figure, okay, what's our plan? How are we going to what's going to happen with the flights going out the next day for the students? And I gave my wife a big hug, and I just needed that, and I knew that I needed to get those 3 students back home to their families. They need a hug. I'm there. We're together,
right.
And if that's my primary focus at that point in time, getting us back. Whether it meant driving, didn't know what the airlines were going to do, so I didn't know if it was driving back,
It's a long
to
drive.
Boston.
I've done
So
it.
we end up driving the next day from Boston to the D.C. area, and that's about 11-hour drive. So so we got back, and what was great was the upper university officials like Herb Vincent. I get a phone call. I'm like, "What's this number?" I don't know who this number is, and this is about 7:30, 8 o'clock, and his point blank was, "What do you need?" "We need to get flights rearranged." So they were working until 10, 11 o'clock, the university and travel agencies and the airlines. They got people from from home, and they were doing their job to get us back home. Really phenomenal. And then we got back. We had meeting with our Dean Lindsay with the College of Human Sciences Education, my school chair, Melinda Solomon.
Debriefing, if you will.
Yeah, a quick debriefing, really getting the students back in. What do you have to do with their parents were there on Wednesday afternoon, and getting them back in. And then I was like, okay, we got somebody to take care of them and for me, and I've got to take care of myself now, because I
Yeah.
a pretty hard fall, and it's a lot to process.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, and you and I talked about it. I mean, just the emotional recovery, the mental health issues that go along with something like that, and I can't even imagine. But
it's been phenomenal. It's been, I mean, the resources I've had. My church has been tremendous. Brady and Katie at First Methodist, and they've been a tremendous source of strength for me and my family, my colleagues, even the athletic training students at LSU. I go into getting back into teaching and administration. Even we've been communicating with our other folks who were there, and it's been extremely cathartic and just to some talking, and it's still, there are areas, you get through one area, then something else kind of, it's a gradual process like anything else that happens with a death of a family member. It's just, it happens.
Yeah.
You're trying to process, okay, this is an ungodly act, but I could be covering an event at a high school game and the stands could collapse. It could be a bus accident. We hear these things all the time of these tragic accidents, and they could happen. So being prepared is I'm prepared medically through my training. Right. And our students are learning to do that, and they've got some advanced skills, even first, second, or third year, and to do what they do as a healthcare provider. But going to schools and what they do, and having emergency action plans in place, having AED, having just knowing the basics to do the right thing when you need to do it. And that's what I saw the most. I was really, I look back and I see the lay people that were there before we even got there in the first minute, and the success that we had. It was a miracle that we had. Unfortunately, they only have 3. You can't really spin it for three fatalities. But under the given circumstances, there probably should have been 15 at least, given the traumatic, the trauma that they had, and based on from the hospitals that we had gotten word back from. So that's what was, it's that they did that, and so everybody stepped up when they had to.
RayCastle, we talked not long after the marathon, and we both agreed, him more than me, that he needed his time to sort it all out. When he was ready, he would come on. I'm glad it finally was time, and I appreciate it. Wow. I got to follow that with going to a break and getting Jacques Doucet from WAFB out here. It's kind of like the old Johnny Carson, don't follow kids and dogs, or RayCastle. Good luck, Jacques.
That's it.
I'm Lee Feinswag. You're watching Sports 225, and we'll be right back.
Great. Thank you.